so you get credit for coming. So I think most of you know me. My name is Bergman. I'm Dean of Math Science Engineering, and this is
Pete Fandel in the IT department.
We are the co-leaders of the College and Career Readiness team. And I wanted to start off with just a little activity. So start off just by yourselves. And what I'd like you to do is, on your card, define, if you will, for me, what it means to be college ready.
Pretty sure that I'm headed to, oh, okay. But I'm pretty sure that I should start Crystal. Oh, yeah. You better go do that.
Is there something? No cheating. Don't cop out your neighbor.
That's what we're writing on the card.
What's that?
That's what we're writing on the card.
Gosh, I haven't seen an style desk in a room in a long time.
So it looks like most of you are getting something written down. Now, I'd just like to take a minute or two and turn to your neighbor and just kind of talk about what you have down on your cards. Okay? So just kind of converse just real briefly. And then what I want to do is kind of see if we have any common themes that come out of this. Okay? So this is all part of a bigger plan here.
Hi.
Hi. Introduce yourself. You don't know each other.
Yeah, and I had so some kind of basic level of competency, and mine is a little more technical. I wrote for genetic areas. I think the biggest thing is the ability to use resources that you So not just you know what I mean. No, switch. You know how to do what you do now. We think we to get
Should we try to combine these?
Yeah.
I like your initial like
Right?
aspects, and I think you hit it. But you had one. You read yours again. I had the reading comprehensive information at college level, but then I also had the demonstrate understanding in examination. I think you hit the demonstrate.
So anybody want to volunteer?
They said they thought they won. So.
Everything's competition.
Only if you want to.
We have intellectually and emotionally able to engage in high-level thinking and demonstrate that thinking.
Okay. Anybody else?
The ability to be responsible, soft skills to attend college level classes, and the aptitude to learn appropriate level of material.
Okay, good.
I wrote down self-directed.
Self-directed?
Self-directed.
Okay.
You're self-directed, then you, okay, I need to find out how I do this.
Mhm.
People at this office send me to you, and then you want to send me back to them. We need to be on the same page.
Sure.
Matt said too, the ability to apply what you've learned, not just memorize it.
So there is no one definition of college readiness. Okay, so I looked up a few from the literature, and I'm just going to read off a couple of these for you. College readiness can be defined as a level of preparation the student needs in order to enroll and succeed without remediation in a credit-bearing general education course at a post-secondary institution that offers a baccalaureate degree or a transfer to a baccalaureate program. That seem reasonable? That seem all-inclusive? Another one, college readiness involves understanding student characteristics and skills within the context of college, the student's ability to navigate the culture that has been shown to contribute to success. So another author's perspective on college readiness. And the last one I have is policies and regulations governing assessment, placement, pedagogy, staffing, completion, and eligibility for enrollment in college-level credit-bearing courses vary from state to state, college to college, and programs to programs. So the reason why I'm asking all this, and we're kind of trying to get to this, is how does what we've said here and what some of these authors have said about what college readiness means, how does that translate to taking a reading placement test or a math placement test and determining college readiness from those tests?
Not easily.
Or how do you measure what you just defined, or what we, as an example, defined? How do you measure that? How do you know if somebody is those things or not?
Not well.
What's that?
Not well.
So earlier this year, a study, nearly 2/3 of entering community college students are determined to be not ready for college level English or math. How do you think those students are being measured for college readiness?
Well, you know I know.
What's the simplest, easiest thing to do?
That's
Test them, right? So what we found, and I say we've done a fair amount of research, and the team's done a lot of research, is that even though it is a quick and efficient way to get some results, what we find is that those results are not actually representative of determining college readiness and or student success once they do get to college. So there's lots and lots and lots of research that's happening with respect to this. And so one of the things that the team started looking towards, and not just because we're doing it, but because it's happening across the country, are multiple measures. Now, multiple measures can come in a couple different varieties. For like math, one of the ways that you can define multiple measures is multiple ways to achieve, in this case, entrance into college level courses. So for us, you can have an ACT score, or an SAT score, or a placement score. Any one of those things. So you could do terrible on the placement test and the ACT exam, and you have a really super great day on the SAT. For math, you're automatically in. Okay? So there's multiple ways that you can get into that college level course. But the way we like to think about multiple measures is looking at a variety of measures and how that measures the student as a whole. And so that's what kind of led us to our current project that we're working on, which is using high school GPA for determining college readiness. Now you're saying, Well, that's just one number. So how does that actually represent multiple measures?
It's over time, it's not one shot.
Right. It's a series of data points that are, yes, culminated into one number, but we're looking at how does a student perform over 3 or 4 years, their behaviors, their attitudes, in a variety of courses. And nationally, this has been studied, and what's been found is that there's about a 0.6 GPA difference between high school and college. So therefore, if you get a 2.6 GPA in high school, you're assumed that you would get a 2.0 GPA in college. So that's the national data. Okay? So you want to talk a little about the study that we did?
Yes, when we looked at our students, because we thought, why look at national data when we obviously have our own captive audience here? And how do we stack up against national numbers? So we took a close look at our own students. So we went back and found, basically we looked at roughly about 1,100 of our past students from 2016 through 2018, and looked at how those students did on a variety of scales. What we did is we went students that were currently in our programs or are basically done with our program. We already know how they did here, but then we went back and grabbed all the data that we had from them from their high school. So what was their high school GPA? What was their ACT score? What was their SAT score? Any data that we had on those students, put that into a giant spreadsheet, and then had a detailed analysis to look at all of those data points that we had, prior to them being here, and then compared them to actually how they did when they were here, and saw what things reflected from their high school days most accurately predicted how their performance was when they actually got here. So we looked at basically current data, and basically what floated to the top, and way to the top, was their cumulative high school GPA being the top predictor how they actually did perform the 2 years they were actually here. So we didn't come up with that number on our own. That was data that, and we looked at all the different variances of all the different things we had, and I don't know how many data points we had, probably 10 to 12 maybe on the average student of different data points we could look at to see which one most accurately reflected their true performance when they actually got here. And that's why we came up with the high school GPA. And not only did we look at GPA then as a whole, then we started looking at where within that high school GPA more likely predicted success. And that's how we came up with our number here that we're doing with on our trial run or our pilot project here at the college this year. And basically nationally, I think it was 2.6. The state of Illinois says that number should be a 3.0. Our actual data here, we came right between there to 2.8, 2.75, 2.8. Was where we set our students where we thought that cutoff number should be. So we actually fell almost exactly halfway between what the national said and what the state of Illinois said on our own students. So that's the number we're running with on our pilot study currently. Yeah.
So when you said high school GPA was the greatest predictor of student success here, how are you defining success here? Just completion or?
C or better in that entry level. In this case, right now the study is focused on math. So if they took we have 3 different entry points for math. We have math 110, 111, or 115. So depending on what track the student wants to take. So we looked at all those 3 different courses, and so they had to get a C or better in that course. So what we were looking at is 1,100 students, and then what grade did they get in math 110, 111, or 115, and then what was the high school SAT scores that they had. So we already had their grade, and then we went back and looked at what their data was prior to that, and then did the analysis and figured out that of all the different variables that we had, the high school GPA was the greatest predictor. And then we drilled into that further, as Pete said, and determined that for our 1,104 students, 2.75 was the cutoff. So again, we're looking specifically at ICC students at that point.
Did you look at the variance of how many did have the GPA that did not pass or I shouldn't say pass, that did not place college ready when they tested into math? Was there did we see a lot of people that were not testing into college ready that did have the 2.8?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I started as Dean of Math Science Engineering, one of the first things that jumped out to me was that 54% or 55% of our total math credit hours were in developmental math. And so I thought that was pretty weird. not knowing all 30 plus high schools that we deal with, but that they were all doing, if you will, such a poor job of preparing students for college level math. Knowing that we're not talking about calculus now, we're talking entry level math courses. And so that's when I started taking an interest in this and working with the math faculty to try to come up with different ways of being able to determine if they're actually ready or not to do the math courses. So that was kind of how I got involved in this 5 years ago.
Will they eventually expand this to English?
Yes. Yeah, we have the data. When we pulled the data for the math, we also, since we were, because right now, again, the other side of our team's project is working with the electronic transcripts, and once we have that electronic transcript stuff, it's gonna make life so much easier. But we literally had people a year ago hand touching all 1,104 high school transcripts and entering data, so we figured if we're gonna go in there and touch it for math, we'll go in there and touch it for English at the same time instead of going back and having to open up those PDFs and look at that information. So we have all the data for the English, we just haven't done the analysis on it yet.
I know currently we use the Next Generation Active Placer. I've been on an advisory ad hoc committee to advise the Academic Standards Committee. That's how I can say it. And basically, we were hesitant to recommend the right placer as a substitute, and we're being pressured to use the right placer, which is problematic for a couple of reasons. So I'm looking forward to more GPA being used in English as well. It would kind of solve a lot of problems for us. There are some high schools in the area and even advisors and even people in placement that are telling students, well, you'll get in if you take the right placer. So we're kind of getting people in the back door in classes that are not just my classes, but your classes as well, that are not going to do well, which depresses and upsets everybody. So I'm really looking forward to GPA being used for English as well.
Well, and again, we're talking about one data point, whether it's right placer, the reading test, whatever it is, and determining that as being using that as a determinant for college readiness. So just because they pass that test doesn't necessarily mean that they have the skills and behaviors, which is, I think, another key component to this whole thing of being able to navigate college. So that was what was, I think, was being mentioned earlier here, is that it's not just do you have the knowledge, but do you know how to use that knowledge to be able to be successful in college? And so I ran across an interesting fact, just to kind of, when the 55% math thing I was just saying, nationwide, I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago, it was determined that remedial education, developmental education, was pretty much at a cost of about $7 billion for students across the country in like 2015, 2016. And that's just the tuition, seat time, that kind of cost. That's not the opportunity lost cost of those students being able to progress. A lot of them don't make it through developmental education and don't have that success at the next level.
Financially it runs out.
Right, all these different things and stuff. And so that's why you're seeing a lot more, this is not the right way to go about it, in my opinion, but a lot more legislation to legislate these ideas. And like I think it was mentioned earlier, that the state of Illinois, we're trying to stay ahead of the legislators. And so we're not disagreeing with the fact that we need to do things differently, I don't think. But we don't want to be dictated like we did with AP exams. So right now, we have to accept a 3 or greater for an AP exam and give college credit for it. That's a state law, So we want to make sure that we're crafting our own policies that work best for our students, not letting Springfield dictate to us how we should operate. Because we know that's full of higher ed educators in Springfield, right? They're all familiar with what we do here. So anyway, get back to our project. So this year what we're doing, we're piloting using the high school GPA for placement into transfer level math, okay? Now, a couple things to point out here. One of the first things we did was we created this flow chart. And I know you can't see it, but basically what this was, Well, this is an advising tool. So there were a number of advisors that were trained on how to do this study that we're working on. And basically what they had to do is they had to go through and not just look at the high school GPA and say, oh, you got a 3.0 GPA, you're in Math 110. What we wanted to do is we wanted to identify, did the student meet an already established criteria for to get into, in this case, Math 110, 111, 115. So they have a series of questions. Do they have an ACT or SAT score? Do they have blah, 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 blah? And if they eventually don't, then they're a part of the study. So if they have the right GPA and none of those other criteria that we've already approved through academic standards and all that kind of stuff, then that group of students is the ones that we're going to actually let them into the respective math class. And so we, on the back of this, has a nice table of all of our high schools in district. And unfortunately, they don't all have a nice perfect 4.0 scale. So they have a variety of scales, so we did the math for them. And then we use this also to determine placement into, like I said, our Math 110, 111, our co-requisite courses. So that's a Math 080, Math 110, or Math 081, and Math 111. Or the GPA could also determine that they go into our Math 099, which is our full-blown developmental course to get into Math 110 and 111. So we don't have, obviously we're just doing this fall, we don't have the results yet. But I do have some interesting results that I don't mind sharing with you at this point. So what we're having the advisors do that we're trained, they got their own special little notebook. And so this is really old school, but basically they put their name, they have to include the student's information, and then they also include their high school GPA, where they went to school, and so on. And then they turn these sheets into me. And then we're going to create, with all these student names, we'll create a data set in PeopleSoft that will be able then to track them to see how do they do in these courses that they're being placed into. So there were 12 to 15 advisors. We primarily focused on the full-time advisors. We didn't go into the faculty advisors because just didn't have time to get to everybody. So people that are seeing a lot of students, I guess. And so I guess my question to you guys, just to kind of see what you're thinking, we're almost, I did a quick tally of number of students that have been placed into Math 110 and 111 by this method to date, or at least everything I've received. How many do you think we're impacting right now at this point? How many students do you think are going to be involved in this study? 50, okay, good guess.
I'd say about 100.
100? Anybody else got a guess?
101, Bob.
So, like I said, I did a real quick count, and it looks like we have about 15 people right now. So, I told Pete, I said, that's a little bit disappointing, because I thought we'd have a larger number. But here's what I think is happening. Okay, because that's what I do, I'm a scientist, right? So the data is not what I thought it was going to be, so let's try to figure out what's going on. Well, we knew, okay, that advisors were not using all the techniques that they had to place students into our Math 110, 111. So we did have ACT score, SAT score, their high school Algebra 2 grade. I can't think of anything else on my head. There's a whole bunch of scores, a whole bunch of different ways that they could meet the qualifications for Math 110, 111. But what was the typical thing that would happen? A student would walk in, they would say, go take the placement test. Well, they can't do that with a study. They have to see their high school transcript first and go through, if you will, the flow chart here of questions. And I think what's happening is they're realizing, oh, they meet it here, they meet it here, or somewhere before they even get down to the GPA component of this thing, but we were not looking for or asking for that information, prior. It was go take the test, and then we'll just base it off the test. So even though the numbers are really small, if you go and look at my enrollments for Math 110, 111, they're very full. So I think we're doing that, and our developmental is way down. Okay, prior to this semester, we went from 54-55% of our credit hours in developmental math to just right about 20% were in developmental math. And so, and again, I try to reassure people, developmental math is not going away. Okay, there's always going to be a need for it. It's just not as big a need as maybe what we thought initially. So the placement test itself, I don't think has been a good measure. We just did our 5-year ICCB report for math last year. So we look at longitudinal data for success in these courses as we've been implementing these different multiple measures along the way. We have not seen any difference in our success rate relative to Math 110, 111, nothing significant. So as we provide additional opportunities for students to get into these classes, they're still succeeding. So, which makes us feel better about the fact that what we're doing is working and helping students.
Will there be a time cutoff? If it's been 15 years since someone was in high school and earned that GPA. I know since my time in high school, I've forgotten plenty of math that I learned. And
We put a 10-year on our pilot study.
okay.
So
I got some comments about that, but
Okay.
go.
Is this 110, 111, or also 150?
110, 111.
Oh, okay, because that kind of helps with his question. Because
Yeah.
it's 110, 111, it's one thing, but for 115, we need shorter than 10 years.
Okay, so let me ask this question to the group. Let's just say hypothetically that the last math class that I took that I successfully passed was Calc 2. Okay, so am I eligible for Calc 3? It was 30 years ago.
Yes.
Yes, but.
Yeah, I mean, I have credit in Calc 2.
That should be the conversation with your advisor.
Exactly. So to your point, I do think there is, I don't know that there should ever be a cutoff with respect to those types of, how many years you've been out of high school or whatever, because we would just be making arbitrary cutoffs.
Sure.
But I do think there's a point where you start having conversations, okay? Would you recommend that I jump into differential equations or Calc 3?
Sure.
Or even Calc 1 at this point. Because you don't use it, you lose it. I mean, it's there and stuff, and I think it's a big difference between having had the material and learned it at one point in time, as opposed to somebody never having had it before. But it is a conversation point, and I don't think that starting where I left off 30 years ago is the right path for me. Now, again, you have that conversation with a student. What I noticed when I did the research for college readiness is that, again, academics is one component of it, but there are a lot of other skills and behaviors that lead to student success, okay? A lot of times we see those skills and behaviors in our students that are more mature. So they have the drive to maybe put the extra time in to get their skills back up to where they were 10 years ago. That maybe somebody that just had a class last year, they have the knowledge, but they don't have the behaviors to be successful in college. So to say that it's all about one thing or two, I think is, short-sighted. But I also do think that's where advising comes in, and you advise a student based off of their various situation. It's not, there's not a manual for that.
And we saw that in, the reason I got involved in this whole team and one of the reasons I chose to be on this team, I do teach a ag math course in the ag department. And it has a varying array of students that are in there from age groups from right out of high school to students that are technically older than I am. And over
Technically.
Yeah,
They're not actually.
And so before I even got on this team, about a year before that actually, I did on my own little personal study where I looked at all my students over the 5 years I taught that class. I pulled out all their data that I had on them and how they did in my class, and I looked at their high school GPA, and I looked at the age of the student, and I started trying to see, was there any correlation between their test scores and how they did in my class? And there really wasn't. There was no rhyme or reason. But you tended to see, and that's where this age thing, I think, why advising is so important. I tended to see in my own data, the older students, even if they hadn't had math in recent history, tended to perform a little better because they were motivated to, because obviously they're probably paying it out of their own pocket. They're there for a reason to maybe improve their employment capability, whatever. You saw, so that age factor, I think that's where we come with this idea that you can't look at one thing. There's a lot of other factors that play into it besides how you did on the test score. And so that's why I got involved in this too, because like I said, I was seeing my own data that these test scores, well, were not showing really how they were going to perform in my class.
And there are some schools that do some very sophisticated multiple measures. Like they'll look at a variety of measures and then have an algorithm that they put those values into to make determinations based off of. The problem with that is that you have to collect all that data up front. You got to know maybe 5 or 6 data points to plug it into the system, and we don't always have all that information, available to us at any given point in time, and it's not standard that everybody has that. And again, if you're talking about somebody that's been out of school for 25 years, maybe whatever one of those data points didn't even exist 25 years ago. So what do you do with them then? Whereas, like say, high school GPA has been something that's been around for quite a while and fairly consistent. What we also want to be able to do with this, okay, so we're studying this from the standpoint of getting students in, but why would the high schools, again, want to share their information with us? Well, there's 2 reasons. One is, we're going to hopefully, when we electronically have the high school transcripts, we're going to be able to facilitate their placement into courses a lot easier. For example, in my department, we have several courses that a high school course will be part of a prerequisite. So for our Chem 130, there's a math requisite, there's a reading requisite, and there's also a chemistry requisite. That chemistry requisite can be met at the high school level. But systematically, there's no way to do that because we don't evaluate the high school transcript. So somebody has to actually physically look at their high school transcript and then override them into Chem 130 as long as they have the math and the reading to go along with that. So we're going to be able to facilitate those types of prerequisites when we have the electronic transcripts, but we're also going to be able to provide feedback to the high school about their student success. So we'll be able to say, okay, Washington High School, you had 400 graduates, 198 of them came to ICC, here's how they're performing. We're seeing that, wow, they're knocking it out of the park in English 110, English 111, I'm making this up now, but maybe they're struggling in math. And again, it's an aggregate. We're not going to point individual fingers at them, but be able to say, okay, maybe there's some kind of disconnect there. And so what we've been doing with the math department is, and the English department gets in on this any day now, is we've been legislated to do transitional math courses, which has been a blessing and a curse, but we are forced to have conversations with the high school, and again, when I say forced, just because it's not on our terms, but we're getting together, we're having the conversations, and we're finding out that it's not that they're doing a bad job, not that we're doing a better job or anything like that. There's just some disconnects. Maybe terminology, vocabulary, whatever the case may be. We've had those high school teachers come in and take the placement test, and they recognize, oh, my students aren't going to get this because the way the questions are being asked are not the way that I ask the questions or whatever. And so we're not actually getting that true measure of, do they understand what the tangent of whatever means. We're getting the fact that they don't recognize it, so they just guess, and then they get placed poorly as a result of it. And so again, it's not about beating anybody up and saying, hey, we're better than you, you're not so good or whatever. It's being able to say, okay, we're seeing a pattern here in math. Again, I'm making that up. So let's get the faculty together and find out, what are our expectations? We had one high school, and I don't remember exactly what the situation was, had to do something with the slope techniques that they use. And we use like 3 different ways you can calculate slope or something. And Pat made reference to, well, we use point slope method the most, I don't know, whatever it was. And they're like, oh, I show them that one day, then we never talk about it again. That type of situation. And so being able to have those more rich conversations about curriculum and figuring out how do we help our students that started out there and end up here be successful. It's not them versus us, it's all about the students.
Has anybody considered class standing? I know in our original discussions about placement, there was some discussion about class standing as a substitute for some other measure. Is that even still, I know it's very,
So there's lots of controversy with respect to class standing because it's done very differently from school to school. One of the things that I've been pushing for at various school districts is a lot of times early college classes are weighted, which then contributes to a higher class standing. So then what we find that students are doing is they're taking classes that they don't really need because they want the points to get a higher ranking in their class. And so they're not choosing classes based off of what's best for them. They're choosing classes that are best for their class rank. Or, those types of situations. So I'm not saying it's not anything to be considered, but I think one of the schools we looked at, that was one of the things they looked at: GPA, class rank, ACT or SAT score, and it was part of their algorithm for a multiple measure, but not on its own.
And I think we're starting to see some of the high schools are offering so many dual credit classes just for this rank thing and other thing, just to say they offer them, that the students are actually going to start running out of grant money too when they get, because they've already used up so much in their high school, and all these classes don't count for the degree they're going to go and hate in college anyway. So you might graduate with 30 credit hours in college, but only 5 of them are ever going to count for their major. So why did they take those other 20?
But what happens is that it meets a degree requirement. So for example, I had a student that went to Eureka. He took 3 history classes, none of which are required for engineering, but he needs Econ 1 and 2. Well, the federal government says, you've satisfied social science requirement already, so we're not going to give you any money for Econ 1 and 2 because of that.
I was thinking back to the pilot that they did where they used financial aid.
No.
Okay.
No, it's not impacting them then, it's at the other end, and unfortunately that's when I have to talk to.
Is there a plan to eliminate placement testing for college, just the math 110, 111? I know you'll use the placement for placement into trig or calc, and maybe you're looking at GPA or math grades for that. But is there a plan? I mean, the testing center staffing is way low and testing takes money. So is there a plan to eliminate the testing for students who would go into 110 and 111?
So I think the overall answer to the question is no, there's no plan. From my perspective, what I would like to see, I don't want to see placement testing go away, okay? Because I think it probably does serve some students. Everybody's different. Maybe you were a goof off in high school and so your GPA is not great. And so you need to be able to show us that you actually have the content knowledge to be successful. And so that's one way of being able to do that. It just shouldn't be our first option. I think it should be our last option or close to the bottom of options that they do.
Do you foresee us moving to the logarithm? Because we just look, do you meet this? And we check the box and we let them in. Are we going to ever be, you would need multiple ways to place? Or are we going to be exclusionary? Like, well, GPA is the best predictor and you're only at 2.3, even though you made it by ACT, SAT, or whatever. Because your GPA is so low, you won't be placed into it. So are we going to use it ever on the flip side?
Well, my view is when we get the transcript piece done, the other project we're working on, where these electronic transcripts come in, then down the road, we have multiple data points for all of those students that want to come here. And then essentially you could, I'm not saying we're going to, but then you could create an algorithm that would look at multiple things from their high school. So it might look at GPA, what was your last math class you took, what was your last English class you took, then you could come up with a weighted average that now isn't looking at any one thing. You could create a true multiple measure and the computer would do it automatically. I'm not saying that's where we're going, but we would have the ability to do that at some point down the road.
And with the electronic high school transcripts, what we're doing, what I think is going to be really powerful with this is that every high school course is tied to a state code. So it doesn't matter what Washington, Metamora, Manual, what they call the course. There's a course code that is tied to the state and has a course description. And so they all have to fall on that, just like all Math 110 should be created equally, so to speak.
Right.
So one of the things that, again, what we could do down the road is that if we found that there's just too much overall variability between the 30 plus high schools that we have from a GPA standpoint, we could then go and say, okay, we could actually pick out, here are the key courses that we want a GPA for, and we could have our own homegrown, if you will, high school GPA based off of Algebra 2, English 3, whatever that is, and make a determination there too. I mean, there's lots of things to do once we get the data, and we've tried to be really smart about, that was what I was trying to talk about this morning with Brad, is building it so it's not just we get it and we can't do anything with it once we have it. We wanted to put it in there in such a way that we can piecemeal it out. You know, I don't care what they got in driver's ed. Somebody else might, but I don't. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a better math student because they got an A in driver's ed. Or, you know, again, my kids' high school, they can do PE for credit. I mean, not for credit, for GPA or not. So it can go for them or against them depending on what they're doing, you know. And again, I can't take that into consideration for the 30 plus high schools that we have, but we could look and say, here are core.
Here's your math GPA over your
Right.
3-4 years each of it.
Core coursework that we want to look at or whatever.
Have you looked at isolating the math GPA versus overall GPA?
We can't until we get the transcript. He's all done. So that's still coming.
And like I say, when we did the transcript project a year ago, I mean, like I said, we were looking at the actual transcripts. So they didn't have the codes on them. So, I mean, like I say, this school might call
You
it,
couldn't compare one to one.
no, this one
Okay.
might call it Algebra 2, this one might call it Math 2, or, you know.
Right.
And we don't know that that's tied to that whatever 10-digit state code and that those two are actually equivalent courses.
So just out of
Theoretically.
curiosity, when you looked at those 1,100 students, when you looked at where they placed versus if you would have used GPA, did you see how many students got placed into developmental who would normally now place college ready? Did you happen to?
We
You
did, but I
remember
don't,
that
remember
small
that.
number off the top of your head?
I don't remember that number off the top of my head.
Did you see any difference between 110 and 115?
No, that's one thing that we did not drill out is one of the things that I would like to have seen, because again, we were looking at it from the 3 entry classes, college level entry classes. I know, they're not all created equally. And so there is a difference between 115 versus the 110, 111. And so, but we did not.
I know now we are not doing 115.
Right.
It could be more problematic.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't disagree, you know, and again, but maybe we look at a GPA plus a grade in Algebra 2 or something for determination of, you know, Math 115. You know, one of the things that I see in my role is, like I say, I look at a lot of high school transcripts. Students are not, and this is one of the things you see in the national data, students are not typically prepared for the placement test. They don't even know they're going to take a placement test. You know, I've said this to advisors before. When I meet with them, I say, how many of you, you know, have taken the ACT or the SAT? And they all raise their hand. So how many of you knew you were going to take it? You know, and they all raise their hand. How many of you took a prep course for it? And a lot of them raise their hand, you know. And then we have students show up on Saturday and say, go take a placement test. They didn't know it was going to happen. And then we base their entire college pathway based off that test score that they didn't know that they were actually going to be showing up to do that day. You know, and again, no prep for it, whatever. So that's what I think was leading to a lot of misplacements.
Yeah, and we think that's probably why the numbers look the way they do. Why we only have only a few numbers that are in this pilot is because the process of just changing how advising did it is getting more students right into 110 right off the bat. That wouldn't have been the way we were doing it before.
So it's kind of like you guys are, it's like you're using a single assessment to potentially place them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they don't place with any of those, then they hit your multiple measure grade point.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And only because those were already established and approved through academic standards.
Right.
So we're not trying to circumvent the shared governance process.
You're just adding a kind of final catching
Right.
point.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know my notes with me, but I have talked in depth with Bergman Community College that is doing something a little bit different. Rather than doing a multiple choice test to place people into English, so they take a reading test. And I know there's a lot of connection between good readers and good writers. Those in the classroom teaching them might say, I'm not really seeing that, but they've been using something where they proctor an exam The student writes a sample, and that's taken to several professors. It's done like through a blind. I think it's like 2 readers, and then there's a tie person who, and basically they've been using that for placement. They're much smaller or fairly not near as many students as we have. They've been using it, and the head of their testing center told me that they had really good results. That literally they can look at a person's sample writing, as long as they're not tired or hungover or didn't know it was coming or whatever, and literally say, oh my gosh, you have such great syntax, you have real command of language, you blah, 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 your audience, where you should be in English 110 or whatever. Would ICC ever consider that as an alternative? I mean, I love the idea of GPA. I think it's very telling. I think it's much more accurate than a one-time test.
I think that, like, say, you already kind of hit the nail on the head with respect to the time component. So I do a lot of placement out of my office. Students come and meet with me, we talk, you know, I get a feeling for what their history is, what they've done, the successes, the failures they've had, then also try to measure their other non-cognitive behaviors that are going to lead to success. And I think that I have a pretty high success rate in placing students. I just don't have time to sit with every single ICC student and have that conversation with them.
Right.
And I think it's the same type of thing there, that from a resource standpoint,
Right.
it's not practical. Now, could that be, for lack of a better term, a final option?
Right,
You know,
tiebreaker or
if we've gone through all these different things and you really just want to give us that one last shot, as opposed to filtering everybody through that process.
Right. We've had, and the head of the testing center said that they promised a 7-day turnaround. They often do it 2 to 3 days. Still way too long for ICC. But one of the things we used to have here at ICC, and I think you know Brian and some of the folks about it, years ago we had something, I can't remember, alternate reading sample, but it was actually a writing test. A student was given 2 recent articles. Well, the ones that Dr. Boyd picked out were on social media. They were asked to compare and contrast or synthesize or whatever. That writing sample would go to, it was done either in the testing center or in the humanities office. It would go to a dean, to a professor, and those, between the 2, they would each blind say, this is definitely an English 95 or definitely an English 110 student. And that would be used to place people higher, never to place people lower. But it was for a student who was frustrated with one-time testing or who felt as though they had test anxiety. And I have to tell you, I was often the person used as a proctor, and I'd say 80% of the time they did not go higher. And so, but it was to sort of soothe the damaged ego of the student.
Sure.
And to tell them, hey, you know what, actually you could be served by our accelerated learning program. Take English 99 and 110 at the same time. You'll do great. But I'm very interested in that process and how we can move forward in English with GPA.
I think as we get more data, and we'll be able to look at the data and be able to make better determinations. Right now, we just don't have the data to be able to make those determinations. But again, I think as we start to get it, drill down in it, we'll find that we'll be able to focus more on those students that don't fit into our bigger picture.
I just want to thank you guys and your committee for all of that data analysis, because I think this will be a very welcome addition for many students, and just look how much it's helped just advising. I think you put the nail on the head with that, because maybe they weren't getting placed before.
Well,
So
and
thank you to you and your committee for that hard work.
what I want to do with, like, say, with the high school transcript, and you know, I say this in public meetings, and Brad kind of shivers, but I also want to take that high school data coming in, and then I want to be able to spit it back out to our advisors. So we create a generic ICC high school transcript, so that they're not trying to, because I literally will get calls from people saying, what does Math 2 mean at Dunlap, or what does this mean, or whatever. Because again, they can't make that determination. But with the state codes, we'll be able to say that we're going to standardize these titles, and so they'll be able to say, oh, that's Algebra 2, and this means here's what we can do. And so it can lead to better advising if they're not trying to look at literally umpteen different variations. And I joke, but like say, I looked at one school over a period of years, and every year they called Algebra 2 something different. Now, it wasn't significantly different, but how they represented it on their transcript, it was just a little bit different. It might be ALG 2 versus Roman numeral 2 versus Algebra 2 versus, I mean, just all these different ways that it's like whatever they typed it in there and stuff. And it was over like a 5-year period. Every year it was just a little bit different. If you're not familiar with those types of things, it gets confusing. You wanna?
Can we ask flowchart? Is it widely available to students?
Huh. It's just, I mean, Not because it's top secret. It's just,
It wouldn't really do them any good to, I mean, they have the scores they have, so it's not gonna help you see it, I guess.
Yeah.
it's just from an advising standpoint, being able for the advisors. And again, I think what it did is it pulled all the things that we've been doing in math over the last several years and putting it in all one place so that they didn't have to go through a laundry list. They just had this nice little flow chart that we're going to ask this question. I don't know what the first question is here, but.
And we did several drafts of this, by the way, because we ran it by the advisors, got their opinion, went and changed it based on theirs, so we kind of got it to where it worked for them and us.
The first question is, does the student need Math 110 or 111? Because again, we don't want students being placed into a general education math course when they really need calculus or business calc or whatever, which surprisingly, again, that's what we see a lot of times at early college, is that that's one of the most common math classes, Math 110 in early college, and they're coming in with that credit. They have checked a box for satisfying the general education math credit with that course. Financial aid says, you're good to go. We shouldn't support you on your track to calculus. Because the federal government's not going to pay you more money than they have to get your degree. So that's the first question. Then it goes into this idea of, do they have Algebra 2? Do they have ACT score, SAT score? Goes through those different things to figure out, and then eventually, if none of that stuff works out, then you use their high school GPA for placement. And then you look on the back of the chart based on the high school and where they're at. But like I said, it's interesting because some are 4-point scales, some are 5-point scales. Morton's a 45-point scale. Peoria Heights is a 6.3 scale. I mean, yeah, it's a variety of things. And so again, that's a heavy lift to ask everybody to figure out. So we put it all in one nice little place for everybody. Yeah.
The electronic transcripts, is that like a parchment deal? Is that, what does that look like?
So right now, what we're working on is the highest used student information system at the high school is Skyward.
Okay.
And so we're working with Skyward Company in particular right now for them to create a customized report that they can just send to the high school. So basically, they can just drop down and send us a file that'll have all the data in it that we need. And then what the idea is, they'll send us that file, and it'll sit on basically like a prospect server. Once the student engages with us, then that student gets pulled through and their data gets assigned to their student ID number. So you may never come to ICC, and that just sits there on that server we haven't figured out how long that's going to sit there, but we'll have it for a while. Or maybe you say, you know what, I'm going to the University of Iowa. And you go to the University of Iowa, and then you say, I'm coming home. Maybe I want to take a class now. As soon as you engage with us, that data gets pulled through, and then we have it, and we can do what we need to do with it. And so that's what the idea is right now with respect to that. I actually spoke with Dr. Durham, the ICCB head dude, last fall. And he's very interested in what we're doing because we do think that there should be a mechanism for us to be able to work with ISBE because they already collect all this data. Well, they don't collect all of it. That's the ironic thing. They collect all the courses and everything the students do except for their grade. So they don't care what grade you got in the class. They just don't want to know what class you had. But it's already on a secure server at the state. So why couldn't we do an intergovernmental relationship between ICCB and the Illinois High School Association? So, because they're already having to send the data there. They send out the data there. And then if we get a student from Chicago, we'd be able to pull the data down, from there. And then here's the other aspect to it. Every student now, I didn't know this, again, as you get into this, you start to learn, every student in the state of Illinois is assigned a student ID number that follows them. So if you're moving from school to school district every year, once you enter into the Illinois K through 12 system, you're assigned an ID number, and that follows you. So they can say, over 12 years, 13 years, wherever you've met these requirements, even though you change schools every 9 weeks.
And if we could get this done at the state level, then any college could just
Right.
do the same thing we're doing, just link up to the state, pull their data in, and nobody would have to do this. Like every college could have access to all that data.
Now, whether that's through a third party like Parchment or, not, that's a whole nother conversation, but way above my pay grade. But again, I think there's applications for this that go far beyond just what's going on here at ICC. But my concern is, how do I make it easier for students in our district to come here, get placed properly, so they can have success, from the very beginning. The other thing that right now is we're doing this based off of basically their GPA, their senior year, mid-year. The other question that's come up is, at what point does that GPA become valid? So, like I said, we feel pretty good, if you will, the 7th semester GPA, but is it different if somebody is an honor student tracking in these high-level classes as a sophomore to be used for early college placement? I'm not answering that today, but I'm just saying, that's going to be one of those things that, where does the GPA become valid? Right now, we're just looking at students that are going to be coming here. But that's the other aspect to some of this too, is that a lot of these students have already engaged us and they're already in early college. So we're meeting them earlier. So it's not a problem. But well, thank you all for coming. If you have more questions, Pete will be happy to answer them.